Reactive Training Systems.
Welcome back to the RTS Podcast. I'm Coach Mike, and today Coach Mel and I are going to be joined by Thomas Lilly. Thomas Lilly is the founder of Zero Weakness. It's a chain of powerlifting-focused gyms that has really grown across Australia, New Zealand, Wales, and they've really expanded quite a lot. And Thomas himself is an elite powerlifting coach. Most famously, he's the coach of Colton Engelbrecht. Colton is, recently powerlifting famous for achieving a 1,200 kilo total, biggest total, raw total all time. And he did it at the body weight of 120.4 kilos. That's 688 dots for those of you who are keeping score. Colton is only 24. He's been competing for 6 years. So to turn in a performance like that is extremely noteworthy, and gathered a lot of eyeballs. I've been kind of following Thomas's work since well before that, actually, and I've been interested in a lot of his training ideas because, in no small part, because we seem to see things a bit differently. We have different approaches to training, and it's always interesting to see, are these born out of differences in fundamental principles, or are these differences born out of just like different applications of these principles or different environments that we tend to operate in, or anything else? So I've been interested in a lot of Thomas's ideas around training for a long time, and then Colton's recent performance became a good excuse for us to get together and talk about some of the stuff on the podcast. So that's kind of the background of what you guys are going to hear today. So we talk about coaching, broadly speaking. We spend a lot of time talking about technique and differing views on technique. Thomas and I have definitely different applications. And if you're kind of a long-time listener of the RTS podcast, you'll immediately come into contact with the ways that these ideas are different. But then also like keep an ear out for the ways that these ideas are similar. And we also will deep dive into programming and programming related topics to include velocity, RPE, velocity-based training, frequency, and similar sorts of discussions more toward the end. So I really enjoyed this. I think there's a lot of interesting conversation to be had, particularly with people who apply things in a different way than we do. So I would love to hear some feedback from you guys. Is this something that you want to hear more of? Do you want to hear something maybe in a little different direction? I don't know. You tell me. Let me know what you think. Send me a message and let me know what you want to hear more of on the RTS podcast. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's get into our conversation today with Coach Thomas Lilly of Zero Weakness. I was just telling Mel like how I would think that infrastructure here would be good and well developed, but I suppose I only need to look at the roads to notice that that's not necessarily true.
Don't worry, man. I feel you. I've been to a lot of places in the world, and very few have shittier internet than Australia. So I guess we're in the same boat.
I would argue that there's some places in Australia that were surprising. I worked in the outback in the middle of nowhere. Pristine.
Yeah, wow. Maybe that's where I need to move because I'm in a city and it sucks.
You're in Perth, right?
No. I'm on the Gold Coast.
Ah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so over on the east side.
Nice.
I've been to Cairns. It's nice.
Yeah, nice. I've got a gym up in Cairns. It's a really, really nice gym as well. They have the award for the cleanest zero gym, that's for sure.
I was there in like 2010. We went there in
nice.
2010.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
As in you came to Australia for some sort of competition, or you were on holiday?
Kind of both. It started out for a competition, and then we kind of extended it to to a holiday. No, it wasn't 2010. It was, who cares? This is like old man shit, right? Like, was it 2010 or 2011? Like, no one cares, but
no,
it's a long time
it
ago.
matters because one of my early entries into powerlifting, they used to run a competition in Brisbane in the Queen Street Mall, and I remember seeing Blaine Sumner there, like way back when. So I wonder if it was one of those ones.
It was like the pink mohawk era, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I remember that. I've wanted to go to Australia forever, and I remember kind of talking to Robert Wilkes sometime after that, and like, hey, like you, because he was at the time like bringing people down for those things.
Yeah.
I was like, hey, pick me, you know.
Yeah.
And so I came down, and Oceanos was in Auckland, and so competed there. And then it's like, while you've made the trek, you may as well, you know, have a holiday. So that's what we did.
Yeah. This is actually one of my earliest insights into RTS. Besides, correct me if I'm wrong, were you on the bodybuilding.com forums? Do I remember following your log on bodybuilding.com?
No.
People must have just posted about you then.
People posted it.
I remember reading about it many years ago, but my first real exposure into the inside of what you were doing was I went to a seminar that was presented by Stephen Pritchard. That would have been 2011, I think.
I remember
through
Steve.
the whole RPE thing, got up the chart and wrote on a blackboard and went through the whole thing. So there you go.
Yeah, Stephen's good people. Yeah. He's in the Wayback Machine, but I like hearing about that. That's cool.
Yeah.
I guess in more contemporary powerlifting news, it's been a big couple months for you, it seems like.
Yeah, definitely. So, well, I don't know. Have we started yet? I don't know.
I don't know.
We have an
We
editor.
just kind of make it up. We
Okay,
make it up
cool.
as we go.
Sweet.
We start whenever we decide that it started. So,
Okay, sounds good.
yeah. It's been kind of a big couple months for you. You've I've listened to some of the stuff that you've posted more recently, and I mean, it sounds like anytime you coach somebody, like, I mean, it's not just Colton, but like several of the people that you coach, like, you know, these things are coming, you know, like you probably have even bigger expectations than what anybody else has publicly, right? Like that tends to be how coaches and athletes operate. So I'm sure it's not a surprise to you, but
No, not at all.
it's a surprise to the rest of the powerlifting world. So that's pretty cool to see.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Like one thing that I really tried to influence younger coaches on. I run a coach development course. I actually just got off a call with a bunch of coaches. Then is a lot of young coaches, young not age, but in coaching age. You know what I'm saying? Get really invested in this idea of potential. You know, the potential of this lift has such great potential. It's like the things that you think are potential are probably less important than the things that are actually potential. And I mean, we're in a strength sport, so people just think this person's naturally quite strong, therefore they have great potential. I've found that isn't always the case. In fact, it's rarely the case. And it's very easy to get so invested into what you want for that athlete that you miss what's important to that athlete to actually unlock their quote unquote potential. And it can be a hard lesson to learn. I'm sure we've all made mistakes in our coaching journeys in terms of things along those lines.
Is potential something that you think about very much, like as you coach or talk to athletes or anything like that? Do you think about it at all?
No, because it's such an unknown. Like you can make predictions, but ultimately things change on the fly. You have to be willing to change and adapt as you go through it. And like I knew when I started working with Colton that there was somewhat potential there, but I wouldn't have extrapolated it immediately to where we've ended up in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, how could you, right? Like if you take your predictions with any level of seriousness, like how could you, you know, like how can you? Yeah, this is where we're headed. You know, I mean, I guess I'm one of the people that still cares about being wrong. It matters to me if I'm right or wrong. And so I don't want to sell to an athlete that, oh, you're going to be one of the greats. I don't know that. I don't really know that. I mean, I know that you have some attributes that look favorable right now. And there's a lot of other stuff that we just can't see and won't know. And so I don't know, it's always been kind of uncomfortable to me to kind of approach an athlete and really talk it up and pitch it to them like, I'm the guy that's going to take you there. Like you hear coaching marketing, I guess, kind of falling in that area. And that's not, I mean, there's a lot you could say about it. And I mean, I think maybe the least that you could say is like, you just don't know that. And you're at best going to be wrong a lot of times,
Yeah. And I mean, it goes in both directions, like coach athlete and athlete coach, right? You don't want to plant the seed in this athlete's head that creates an inflated ego to the point where they're not willing to do the work that they actually need to do to reach their true full potential. Or you don't want someone to believe that they are some sort of gift. And if I was to sort of highlight one of the things that makes Colton so different is that he's very not invested in open powerlifting and dots and numbers and competition. He's very much invested in just seeing what his body can do.
That's interesting. Yeah,
which to me has been unique for a top level powerlifter. Everyone's always focused on these particular records. And so while Colton wanted to put the record to his name, like who wouldn't want to do that, he knew it's just a stepping stone on the way to seeing what he can actually do. And that's what he really cares about. It's why people mistake it for arrogance. They hear him say, well, I don't really have any competition. It's because he's not focused on what other people are doing. He's just trying to be as strong as he can be.
Yeah, I think that's got to be pretty important, especially like considering the space that he competes in. So let me throw this your way and catch your reaction to it. I've had the experience, both myself and in some of my lifters, where you're training for a competition, then something happens, you pick up a minor to moderate injury, and you're kind of in that terminal phase right before the taper, and you go, oh man, now I'm not going to be able to compete. And then something happens, maybe things heal up, come together a little faster than what you expected. And you go, okay, well, maybe I'll show up, just give it a go. We'll see what happens on the day, And so you go into the competition like that. And it's been, again, my experience of some of my athletes that they show up and things are out, honestly, pretty good. You've done most of your training. You maybe had a longer taper, less than ideal taper, but you did most of it and things more or less hold together. And maybe you didn't like reach this lofty goal, but you performed more or less to where we would have expected you, like in the ballpark, right? But since they went into that competition kind of expecting not to compete at all, they come away just thrilled, like, man, how awesome was that? I still did pretty good. And, I was expecting to not compete at all. And so it's a very positive experience. And after like having noticed that a couple times, I start thinking, I'm not sure that like the expectations around it are actually doing us any good. So like people show up thinking like, oh, I've got to hit this number, and, you do goal setting, or I do goal setting with athletes, and we talk about like, what's your plan A goal, and like, what's kind of the minimum that you think is worth showing up for. And lots of athletes, that's a window about this big. It's a very narrow window that they envision themselves hitting, and I just don't know that. Like, I mean, it's good to have goals and direction and things like that, but I think kind of an over attachment to those types of things, and over attachment to the number, to the short term doesn't do a lot except steals your joy a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I've experienced that myself. My best ever squat in competition was done 6 weeks after a tear in my adductors. I tore my adductor, didn't squat for the 6 weeks, and same thing, went in with the attitude of I'm just going to see what I can do, and did my best ever squat. Or look at Colton's total. That meet was not planned. He was meant to be doing the abs clash sort of 4 weeks after that. It just so happened I have my own podcast, obviously the Zero Podcast, and I made an episode about his stuff. And because I had said this in a post or on a story, and I had said the fact that he didn't peak for it, and people were like, "Whoa," but he was kind of peaked for it. Like, it was in a deload week, and it was in a transition block. It was in that very high percentages lifting heavy. But he went in. Literally, he got the sort of notification that he may not get his visa on the Thursday, and the competition was on the Saturday. So he's just like, I'm going to do this competition. He didn't even have the time to create the expectation for the competition. So he went in super relaxed. And I mean, we all know what happened from there.
Yeah. I think there's something to that. And I mean, it's a hard thing to let go of too. It's a hard thing to get people to relax, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
You invest a lot of time and effort, and I think what training is for is the saying that you don't rise to the occasion, but you fall to the highest level of preparation. And as he went into that preparation he had done had likely set him up pretty strong for the next few weeks.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, it's a wild performance. Yeah. Well, you mentioned the Zero Podcast, which has been pretty cool, by the way. I enjoy listening to your thoughts on training and whatnot. You keep me company in some of my training sessions when I'm up in the garage, otherwise by myself. So appreciate that.
You're welcome. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing at this point.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you're helping me cope with whatever else I've got going on.
Well, I'll give you a shout out to my 12 listeners. Well, 11, because it'll be minus you.
No, it's cool. I do seriously enjoy it. And that's kind of, I mean, we're kind of using Colton's recent performance as a good excuse to kick off this conversation. But it's been brewing for a bit before that, just because I think you've got interesting things to say around training, and also like some points where, I mean, I guess technically it's like where we just see things a little bit differently, but it's always curious. I wonder how differently we actually do see them, So like, just to kick us off here, technique is one of them, because you talk about technique, and feel free to stop me if I'm mischaracterizing you or anything, but you talk about technique as being a thing that you really focus on in your coaching. It's something that gets a lot of attention, and you, I think, have some detailed technical models that you coach from. And when I heard you talking about this, I'll confess here real quick. I thought, like, there's no way that, like, something I want to ask about is, like, how is it that your lifters use, like, they just squat differently or they bench differently or something like that. So I started looking at some of your lifters and looking at videos and stuff like that. And I thought, well, I'll be damned, they do kind of squat the same. No, maybe I didn't look at everyone, or I didn't look at the right examples or something like that, but they did catch my attention. So do you want to, I don't know if you've got kind of a pocket speech that you typically give about technique or anything, but how have I done on characterizing your central views?
I definitely do. I definitely have the pocket speech. In my research and preparation for this podcast, one of the podcasts I listened to of the RTS was one a little while back about individualizing technique, and like one of the opening statements was that you don't believe in a gold standard, and I'm guilty of very much talking about a gold standard basically all the time. And so You're 100% right. We do have a heavy emphasis on technique. When I say we, I mean like Zero as a whole, right? We're now eight gyms with 2 more opening and 30 staff and coaches and all the rest of it. And so it's built on this premise that if we're talking about powerlifting, strength is ultimately expressed through technique. Like the way that you move is how we express our strength. So everything kind of centralizes to that and stems out from that. So how we cue, how we get someone to move is related to our idea of the gold standard. That then filters into the programming decisions that we make to impact the way that someone moves so they can express their strength on the platform. Absolutely. And the way that we look at technique is, you know, if Mel is doing a bench press and busts up her shoulder and goes to see a physiotherapist, they don't take a photo, a measurement, an X-ray, MRI, CT scan, send it away, get a perfect model made of Mel's shoulder, and then say, hey, Mel, this is your shoulder and this is the way it moves. This is how we're going to fix it. No, they just reach under the desk and say, this is a human shoulder. You are a human. You have a human shoulder. This is what's wrong with it. This is how we're going to fix it. And so our model is the reverse in the sense that we're looking for all the commonalities that we have and building that into a technical model that everything stems out from. And so we break down each of the 3 lifts into 3 what we call biomechanical rules, and everything points back to that. So every problem-solving decision we make, every programming decision we make essentially points back to these 3 biomechanical rules. My crazy, ridiculous claim is that I can fix any problem in any lift, no matter what it is, because there's only really a few breakdowns that happen in any lift. They just look different on different people and they look different at different scale. And so to use your podcast on individualizing technique as an example, there were things like modifying hand position, foot position, all that sort of stuff, and how that then feels for the lifter. The questions are always just the reverse. So it's like, this change makes this lifter feel better. The question I always ask is, why does that change make that lifter feel better? Then we've got the unique situation of, because one thing, again, using your own words, we're not given a manual on this. There's no guidebook as to this is how you squat, this is how you bench press, this is how you deadlift. Essentially, what I've tried to do is create that manual, and we revert back to that manual. And so it's 100% the biggest issue that we have, because literally every coach has then essentially had to go out and build their own model based on the information that they can sort of pick and choose from, which is why every expert is saying something different, which is kind of unique to powerlifting, right? Like most experts in most sports are saying pretty similar things about the most readily accepted training techniques and training principles and programming principles. It seems like we're saying a lot of different things, but I love what you said in terms of we are saying different things, but how much of the commonality is there underneath it all, the principles that are actually driving the change, right? And so, yes, we absolutely believe in a technical gold standard. We're consistently working towards that gold standard. And I'll go as far as to say, I actually believe that all coaches are doing this. It's just that if you can't completely explain what your gold standard is, you open it up to ranges to accept, to create acceptance for what you see. So even as far as saying, like, there's the, a lot of people are talking about like the self-organization kind of thing, but this is what I would change as a coach. It's like you're changing to move towards something. What is that something? The clearer you can define what that thing is, the more consistent your approach is going to be across cueing, across programming, problem solving, technical stuff. So just like you guys put a huge, heavy emphasis into the data and anecdotal practice of programming that we do on technique as well. It's probably a good way of looking at it.
Are the 3 biomechanical rules, is that something that's like, can we get into that here, or is that something that's maybe too deep of a conversation?
No, it's not. It's not too deep, and it's certainly not like some secret proprietary blend or anything like that. It's pretty stock standard, to be honest. So, yeah, I mean, like if you'd like, I'd just go through an example of one of the lifts.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so obviously,
I'm just taking notes here.
Obviously, this can be expanded, and we can go deep into the weeds and talk about the nuance of everything, because if people have been exposed to different models or ideals, you might just write off the potential of this straight away, for sure. But so the first rule in any of the 3 lifts is, where does the power come from? What's the thing that's actually moving the weight? Because that's probably going to be the most important thing to tidy up. So if we're talking about squats, where does the power come from? Power comes from muscles of the legs and hips, right? So your quads and your glutes are really doing the big work in terms of moving the weight from point A to point B. Our job is to express that power, ideally with no leaks. And so this is where like the downstream stuff comes in. What are the knees doing? What are the feet doing? Where's the foot placement? Where's the angle of the feet? All of that sort of stuff. So like, you know, the whole knees in versus knees out kind of argument. And you said, you know, all of our lifters kind of look the same. You don't see a lot of lifters with a close stance with knees caving in and touching each other, because we've by design worked towards not doing that, because I believe that's a power leak. A lot of these arguments always come down to safety. I mean, Mike, you're arguably the most respected coach in the industry. Do you ever go into a coaching relationship with a client where your primary goal is like, I want you to be the safest on the platform? Like, don't worry about the medals. I want you to walk away with like the safest lifter award.
I mean, obviously not, but I do have to point out that, I mean, it is a concern, right? Like,
absolutely,
you can't get stronger if you're getting injured.
100%. Absolutely agree. So like, while safety is the primary argument that people make, oh, it's actually safe on your knees to have them cave in, who cares? Like, it's not what we're talking about. We're talking about expressing strength. And so ideally, I don't want to see any power leaks, knees moving in or too far out, because too far out is arguably a worse problem than the knees caving in a lot of ways. Is representative of doing stuff that it shouldn't be doing in terms of moving the weight. It's a strategy that the body's relying on as a compensation for something that could potentially be better, in my view. So like, rule number 1 is about creating and maintaining that torque at the hip, so the power generated by the quads and glutes goes to where we want it to go. Rule number 2, breathing and bracing. That's going to be the same across all 3 lifts. So breathing and bracing, not just because it sounds pretty, but it's all about like, how do we then transfer power from the muscles of the legs and hips to the bar? What's between the hips and the barbell? Well, your spine can move and bend and twist and go in all different directions. The first segmental process is going to be breathing and bracing, securing that aspect. The second part is going to be what you're doing up here with your shoulders in terms of transferring the power into the bar. And so all of our cueing, all of our technical direction, everything relates back to those 3 things. Every change that we make for the individual relates to expressing our ideal of what those 3 things is. And so, yeah, we have pretty in-depth understanding of what we're trying to achieve with that.
Yeah.
The first one reminds me of when I was doing Olympic weightlifting, and you mentioned that sometimes the body does not know the correct solution for the task at hand intuitively, and sometimes it has a good idea. You ask someone to do a snatch, they're going to deadlift it up, do a reverse curl and press that they don't know or have explored that technique model or been given some guidance on how to move around a barbell. And I use snatch Olympic lifting because you just have a more conceptual idea of how to move wrongly for those movements than you do for a powerlift, where everyone kind of assumes they can kind of squat, bench, deadlift. But most people, I think, exploring a bit within the range of their individualization comes back to what you're talking about of sometimes the body needs a push to see or get away from its chosen pathway. And that sometimes the path it chooses to create a solution isn't the most effective. And I think I saw someone else posted on this about movement that does not actively contribute to moving the bar through that whole range of motion is an efficiency leak and a Q4 correction. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at.
Yeah, for sure. The really difficult part of that, sorry, Mike, the really difficult part of that is, I guess, the confidence as a coach and the ability to sell the concept to the lifter of this is where you are now. This is what is going to produce the best result in the outcome. And then the skill to actually build a system where you account for what you might consider technical deficiencies that allows the lifter continue to progress and build strength at the same time as slowly building a foundation of better technique underneath it. Because it's all well and good to say, like, your technique sucks, let's strip it back and fix it from the ground up. But lifters want to get stronger at the same time. And it's never a case of you have to do that. You can absolutely push gains. And just accept the fact that things are going to be ugly. And even when you've got a perfect ideal and a perfect system of correcting it, things are probably still going to get ugly at times. It's not about you have to be perfect. It's about let's work towards better, accept that you're probably never going to get to perfect, but getting towards better is probably going to be better for your lifting, your strength, your safety, everything overall.
Sure. Yeah. Mel, something you mentioned about the efficiency, the movement efficiency thing, that this comes up a lot for me, specifically when I'm deadlifting, right? That there's a lot of movement that's happening that's not lifting the barbell off the floor. And the question I get from time to time is like, isn't that inefficient? But I mean, maybe technically, but that does not seem to be a bottleneck. You know, like it's not like, oh, you're just physically out of energy because, you know, you wiggled your arms like this before you initiated the pull. Like it's not I think there can be an overemphasis. Like you do generally want things to be efficient. Yeah, like a 3-step walkout is better than a 8-step walkout. Yeah, you know, we don't want to burn energy for no reason. But if you can use a little bit of energy and it helps you get into a better position or generate a little bit more tightness, that's worth the trade. And could you theoretically get there with greater efficiency? I don't know, maybe you could, but until that happens, you know, like you proceed with the tools that you have in hand, right?
For sure. And I mean, like I think that's a different conversation anyway. You're talking about the difference between setting up for the lift versus actually performing the lift, right?
Sure.
Because the same could be said for, you know, aggressive back slaps and ammonious sniffing and pacing around and listening to heavy metal or the Zero podcast or whatever you listen to when you lift. Yeah. But I mean, it kind of raises the bigger question. If we bring it back to the actual performance of the lifts, we've thrown around some words here that are fancy words, not even fancy words. They're words that we never question the definition of. Like you made a post the other day about breaking down frequency into more clear definitions. I fucking love it because I hate all of these conversations that we always have about this stuff where we haven't clearly defined what the thing is. And so everyone's arguing from different planes of thinking, right? And so it raises the question. It's like, we talk about, okay, let's make technique the safest, strongest, most efficient way to move the weight. Strength is easy to measure. Weight on the bar, sure. What is efficiency? What is safety? You can't measure safety when someone's performing a lift. You can only measure the absence of injury. And the measurement of the absence of injury is going to be purely based on what you've seen and experienced as a coach or read or understood. It's guesswork for the most part. And so same thing with efficiency. I mean, you can use tools like measuring bar speed, but bar speed, yeah, it's a great tool that you can extrapolate and build charts and everything out of. But ultimately on the day, you don't get points for lifting faster or slower. You get points for lifting more weight, right? Is it bar path? Is it like when people say it feels more efficient, does it feel more efficient because it's faster because you're making movement compensations that are going to be bottlenecks in the future? Like this opens the door to so many more in-depth conversations that, again, it's just something that I've put probably too much thought and effort and energy into building out, but seems to be serving us quite well. Yeah.
Well, it's a good point. Let me bring it back to the actual execution of the lift. I think that, well, the way that I tend to coach technique is to use the lifter's technical breakdowns to kind of inform that process, and one of the coaches who worked with us for a long time, Dr. Megan Jones, she was really good at this, where she would watch like a first attempt, second attempt, third attempt, and find deviations between them. So you kind of end up serving as your own benchmark, so I think what I think and what a lot of people hear when it comes to like a technical gold standard is more like the starting strength model, or something like that. Not that specifically, but that kind of thing. Like you put your feet here, you keep your knees here, not there. You put the bar here on your back, and deviations from that are not really acceptable. That's kind of what I think of when I think of like a technical gold standard, but kind of what you're talking about in terms of biomechanical rules seems like it could be different from that. So just to try to put an example on it, and feel free to direct me. Like I mentioned, trying to do a little bit of homework on some of the people that you coach. One of the things I noticed is that a lot of the bench grips tend to be in the same, more or less same spot, like not super wide, not super close, have this medium grip, kind of similar foot placement between lifters. Do you coach people that are exceptions to like those in broad strokes, that are like, this person benches with a grip that's proportionally wider for their body, and then this other person tends to bench with a close grip? Just as an example.
I mean, I've worked with a lot of people over the years, and so inevitably, based on skill changing over the years, things look differently. But by and large, things look pretty similar across the board. We don't use any standards, as in like grip the bar with your index finger on the rings. I don't believe in anything like that. So like, as far as individualization goes, I believe there's only two things that we ever individualize, which is where you put your hands and where you put your feet. So it's going to be, so in terms of the cueing is relatively universal, but we break down cueing very specifically as to what we're trying to achieve with cueing. So we've got levels of cueing that we rely on that point back to a direction that we're trying to head. But ultimately, it comes down to, does the hand placement and does the foot placement allow the expression of rule number one? Where does power come from? So rule number one of bench press is going to be pecs. Like, we're trying to maximize the ability to express power through the muscles that are actually moving the weight. And it just so happens that for most people, that tends to be in a relatively similar spot.
Okay.
Now, obviously, some people are going to end up wider or narrower. It's going to look relatively different on some people. Obviously, if you've got a small female versus a massive human being with really long arms, it's going to look different for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But it tends to end up in a relatively similar spot. But I mean, you could say that about lifting as a whole. The ones that really stand out are just like the outliers. You take Leah, the French lifter, and look at her very narrow squat and very low bar squat, and you're like, this is an outlier that stands out to us. If we just took a broad average of most lifters are putting their hands in a pretty similar spot, feet in a pretty similar spot, right? So you're going to get the same from my lifters. It probably just looks very simple because the cues we use to engage all of those things that we're talking about around these rules are very consistent. So most people are going through the same thought process with their execution.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, I see where you're going with that. And
so I guess to expand on that a little bit further, as to, okay, let's say I was working with someone that bucked the trend on what we're doing. I'm never thinking. I'm always thinking again. Not what am I trying to say here? I'm always thinking, how much better, how much stronger, how much further could you go if you were adhering to what I believe the gold standard to be?
Sure.
I just have a hell of a lot of confidence in moving people towards that because of my experience and the results I've seen it produce across the board, across various shapes and sizes of lifters, tested, untested, etc. So I have a hell of a lot of confidence with that. I can see where coaches get confused when they don't have that data to lean back on.
Yeah. Well, I can see. I mean, it sounds like it's not terribly far off to say that like there is kind of a detailed technical model in the way that a lot of people think about it. Like you could almost make a picture, make an illustration. Perhaps you've done that. That is like the way to squat or bench or deadlift in the style that you teach. And then, I'm certainly not trying to make a gotcha or anything. And like the existence of the existence of an exception to a given rule wouldn't be a gotcha anyway. So that's not just trying to figure out kind of where the outlines of this are, and like explore these definitions that we were talking about. But
I mean, like, so just because obviously if listeners are hearing me speak for the first time, I'm presenting with a lot of confidence, right? And so I want people to understand that I've arrived at this point not by trying to prove myself right, but by consistently trying to prove myself wrong. And every time I am proven wrong, I'll change that part of the system, refine it, get better at it, and keep moving forward. So I'm constantly looking, because I don't care about comparing myself to other gyms and other coaches and all that sort of stuff. All I want to do is be really good at what we do so we can continue to help people. And the best way I can see to invest from my level and my brand is to consistently be trying to think, how can we improve? And as far as the coaching product, it's like, where does this fall apart? Where doesn't this hold up? Where are these exceptions? Why are they exceptions? What do we need to change? And as we continue to do that, we continue to refine things continue to get better. So got to stay a student of the game.
Question for you. So if you reflect upon like the model you're thinking about, it's like standard distribution curve that most people in your model kind of respond to this. How do you go about finding the outliers? So if you have a intermediate model lifter comes to you, stance and position kind of wonky and movements kind of wonky, but are very strong. Do you try to see if the model fits for them and try and correct them into a certain movement pattern, the golden standard, or do you entertain their way of moving for a little bit before changing it, especially if they're coming to you very strong?
No, change it. Absolutely. Yep. Complete faith and trust in the system. And again, happy to be proven wrong. If it doesn't work for them, then something's wrong with us. We need to change something. But to this point, it just doesn't seem to be happening. And so, I mean, bear in mind that a lot of these things that we're changing end up being like fundamental deficiencies that a lifter has anyway. You know, like, yeah, we clean up this wonky foot placement and give a few cues to what we expect to see in the hips. But what we find along the way is that they weren't breathing and bracing at all. And maybe they would have continued to make, adequate progress by not changing that other stuff. I don't believe that, but I'm entertaining the thought of it.
Yeah, I don't want to. You can imagine like a caricature position on either of these ends of the spectrum, where, and I don't think that's what anybody is saying. So like neither, to take the example that Mel gave, where you have somebody very strong, intermediate. I wouldn't necessarily just accept that whatever they're doing is correct because they're a very strong intermediate. I'm just slow to change those things, and I'm happy to let the changes occur gradually over time. It's fine to me if it takes 6 months or something there's like a steady progression of technique over a several month period of time. That doesn't bother me really. And like the way that I would tend to change it is, I think, because I've kind of primarily operated in an online space, you develop tools that function in an online space. I would tend to choose exercises that enforce the kind of self-correct some of these positional things. If they're coming too far forward, or you see different just kind of weird movements that happen as imagine a lifter coming out of the bottom of the squat and you're looking at their bar path going, what is this? Like, I'm not a huge bar path guy. It's not like it's got to be this very perfect up and down thing, but sometimes you do look at it and you go, well, that's weird. Like maybe it doesn't, I may not imagine that it needs to be perfect, but whatever that is, ain't it? Like the way I would tend to handle that is more in the space of like, well, can I give you something that's going to kind of self-correct that sort of thing? And then we can integrate those movement solutions slowly over time. It sounds like you just take a more direct approach to making that change.
Well, yes and no, because now we're talking about two different things, right? Like, would I want to change this person's technique? Absolutely, yes. What's the method in actually achieving that? Might look a lot more like what you're saying. You know, in terms of like, where's proximity to competition? If they're competing in like 3 months' time, doing a complete overhaul of technique is probably a terrible idea. So how can we start to build in some of the fundamental principles without impacting their ability to perform right now? Like in theory and practice is going to look a little bit different because we have to cater towards, like, we're not complete robots. We have to cater towards, building trust and rapport, lifter preference. We have to cater towards, like, what are the immediate goals? What are the long-term goals? Absolutely. Sure. I'm a bit bullish with it, obviously, because I'm, again, confident in our ability to make these changes. But there's that absolute practical element that's not as simple as just like, your technique sucks, let's change everything.
Well, good point. I took it to mean, I guess, to clarify, what I'm hearing then would be that when you say change it straight away, it's like, this is an item, we want to work on this at the time and place that it's appropriate, but this is a headliner, and then you work on it directly.
Yeah. And it's also interesting. Like, I really love talking about all of this stuff. So I'm glad we're having this conversation, because the way that I'm presenting it is how I think about it as a coach, rather than how I would actually approach it with the athlete. I wouldn't say we have to change this, this, and this, and this. I would start building stuff, like you say, you build into their program things to self-correct this thing. I'd be doing much the same thing. It'd be like, there's a couple of things we'll work on your squat. These things we'll work on after the competition. These are the things I want to dial in right now. It's going to be a far softer and more digestible approach.
Of course, yeah.
And it sounds like you really involve the athletes in the debriefs. Like, when we send a block out, like, I tell, this is what this is supposed to do for your squat. This is what this is supposed to do with their bench. This is what I see. So I picked this movement. So I want you to feel if this feels correct, and I want you to pay attention to this. And it sounds like you involve the athlete. You let them know about these are the things that we are correcting. These are the movements we're using to correct them with. And here's the long-term goal.
Yeah, I mean, it not only does it need to be an iterative process. I want the person, my assumption is that they're not going to be with me forever. So I want them to get as much value and understanding and learning out of me that they can while they spend their time with me. But I mean, it's a sales process as well. Like, I'm not just going to throw an exercise at them and hope they believe it's valuable. I want to showcase the value so they actually approach it with an attitude of, this is going to help me if I perform it in this particular way. It's the art of coaching, right? It's why we do what we do.
Yeah. Giving you Bulgarians, but I'm giving you Bulgarians to make your legs bigger, to make you lift more weight. They land differently.
Can I ask another example type question about this?
Please.
Yeah, beating up on technique today, but I want to ask the questions while we got you here. But would you ever? This is a thorny way to start that question. Apologies for that. But would you ever? No. I'm imagining somebody that deadlifts with a round back style. That they get really forward flexed when they pull anything heavy. And in my experience, this has been a very difficult thing to fix. And I've had some lifters who, various points in my career for different reasons, we said, hey, this is a thing, we want to stop deadlifting with this kind of flexion position. So we're going to deadlift flat back style now. And sometimes we can do that. Plenty of times it's a struggle, and I've had times where we never really get back to the place where they're like deadlifting more weight now that it's a flat back style. Just kind of wondering how you think about spinal flexion in the deadlift.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, like, again, please, people listening, don't come after me. We're talking in very quick terms, I guess. Sure. I'm not a believer in it. For a number of reasons. I mean, the first question that comes with it is like, what spinal flexion are we talking? Because then you've got the crowd of like, lumbar flexion, you're going to die. Lumbar flexion is not a problem. Don't worry about it. And then thoracic flexion should be something that we lean into and try to do. Then you've got like the crowd of people that have a naturally kyphotic thoracic spine. They're naturally rounded over, and then they're great deadlifters. And a lot of the times we zone in so much on that we ignore the fact that they suck at squats and bench press exactly because of the positions that they lean into in the deadlift. So first and foremost, I'm generally a powerlifting coach. I don't really coach anyone in the deadlift only division. And so you could potentially make the argument that in someone who's only invested in deadlift could find some sort of advantage from that position. I would still disagree to that to some extent. So I'm definitely team neutral spine, flat back, whatever the hell you want to call it, because it falls in lines with our 3 rules, which is what's actually moving the weight in a deadlift. Well, it's the muscles of your legs and your hips. We're transferring that through your spine into the bar. The more rounded forward your back is, the longer the lever between your hips and the connection point being your shoulder, technically the harder it's going to be. And so then you have the argument of, well, technically versus in real life is different. But in general, I've had a lot of success moving people from rounded backs to flat backs. And a big part of it is because this is the beauty of these 3 rules, is that they're the same on all 3 lifts. It's just legs and shoulders are reverted on inverted on bench press. And so the solutions for upper back issues on squat are exactly the same as that for bench press, and have carryover then into the deadlift for the positions that we're trying to achieve there. And so effectively, if you've got one problem on one, you've got it on all 3 lifts. And we see this consistently. So like that example of someone who's rounded forward either by choice or by nature tends to have a much harder time finding the required retraction depression of the scaps to do a really good bench press or get in a really good low bar squat position. So there's some good correlation and carryover between those as well.
And
hey, if Ronnie Coleman was a powerlifting coach, he might have said, everybody wants to build custom training programs, but nobody's got a process for how to do it on the regular. But we do. You see, most coaches rely on trial and error, and that's fine if that's your jam, but we wanted a coherent process. Way back in 2015, when I had already been coaching for over a decade, I finally had learned enough from enough sources that I was able to put the pieces together into one coherent process. We call it emerging strategies. The bulk of our 16 world record setting powerlifters set those records using an emerging strategies program. We talk about emerging strategies a ton on this podcast and everywhere. If you ever want a single thorough explanation for how to implement the emerging strategies process, well, that's the Emerging Strategies course. The Emerging Strategies course includes 8 modules. That's almost 24 hours of video instruction covering everything. We teach fundamental concepts and basics all the way through integrated examples and case studies. You can watch it at your own pace, as fast or as slow as you want. Oh, and you know the RTS community, our private community that offers you just a stupendous amount of value all on its own? Well, if you enroll in the Emerging Strategies course, you get 6 months of that community membership for free. If you have any questions about some concept, you just post it in the network or jump on a live office hour call with one of our RTS coaches, and you get your answer. If you'd like to enroll or just learn more, to include seeing a full lesson list, all you have to do is go to reactivetrainingsystems.com and click on courses in the main menu. You're going to love it. Would you expect then that people who are, say, really good bench pressers tend to not struggle as much with the lockout of their deadlifts?
When you say really good in terms of like what I deem to be the gold standard of bench press, then I mean potentially, yeah. Okay. It's not that simple and that automatic, right?
Sure. I'm just thinking like if you were a really good bench presser, then that may, if that would then solve. If you're a good bench presser, then conceivably that wouldn't be your problem. And if that's not your problem, then you should be able to deadlift with a more or less flat back, and we would see that lockouts in the deadlift go a little bit easier. I mean, that's a lot of what ifs chained together, but
yeah. I mean,
it's just kind of
if rounded back deadlifts were the answer, why wouldn't rounded back squats be the answer? You know, they're so mechanically similar. It's funny that we don't, and I can show you a completely rounded back squat if I'm allowed to share my screen and pull up a video.
Sure. Yeah.
It'll take me like 2 seconds to find this video. Give me a sec. Because this is, I've got permission to share this video, by the way, not for the purpose of this podcast, but in general. Because this is the video I use to ask the question of like what does safety mean, or why technique, what is good technique, because a lot of people again lean on this idea. How do I mute this? A lot of people lean on this idea that it's the strongest, the safest, most efficient way for the individual, and for this particular person this was the strongest, and by definition of absence of injury the safest, and by definition of getting shit done in a bar path the how do I do this? The most efficient. Is that showing up for you guys somewhere?
Yes.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay, sweet. This is like a testament to the resilience of the human body right here, this guy's squat.
Oh.
So like, you know, for people who are of the completely committed self-organizing technique camp, if you can look at this and say I wouldn't change it, then yeah, sure, you're 100% in that camp, right? But if you want to move this in the particular direction of I want to see his back straighter, you need to be able to answer every question as to why. Like, why does that matter? If it's safety, well, that's not enough, because this guy's never hurt his back, ever. He'd never hurt his back doing this technique for many years. And he deadlifts exactly the same, or back in the day, we fixed this and got his back straight, yada, yada, yada. But this was the first video I ever saw of this guy, and I was like, bro, can I please share this? Because this is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sympathetic to the idea that you know, people kind of have these latent technical standards in their mind, because you know, it's a good example, like what you're saying, like to look at that and say, like, would you change anything? I mean, I would want to explore some options for sure, but to kind of come back to the deadlift version, if I've got a lifter who tells me that they're a power lifter, they care about the biggest total that they can get, and I say, okay, let's try to straighten your back on the deadlift. I mean, coaching techniques aside, like of course you'd phrase things a little differently and all that, but you know, if we try that and it's just consistently producing a weaker deadlift, at some point I'm going to be inclined to say, well, let's go with the thing that makes you lift the most weight.
100%. Yeah. And I mean, I would do the same. Absolutely. I guess the angle I'm coming from is I'd be confident to change that effectively. And that's just because like, it's not simple enough to be like, let's straighten your back and try to deadlift.
Yeah.
Of course we can't expect that to work. And side by side to their current deadlift is going to feel weak as hell. It's like, how do we build this into a long-term system? And also, I think the hardest thing for me to project through this is the idea of expectations of change to technique. It's like expecting someone to change their technique. What time frame do we put on that? You have to have reasonable expectations as to time frame to see this improvement happen. And it's going to be vastly different depending on the person, where they're at, what their situation is, what their goals, their competition schedule, all of that sort of stuff is going to impact it significantly. So like getting someone who, a good example is like fixing someone's shoulders in a low bar squat position. I've worked with and continue to work with a lot of big juicy dudes on gear, and big juicy dudes on gear are not necessarily known for their shoulder flexibility. And so what comes with really bad shoulder flexibility, low bar position, and throw performance enhancing drugs in the mix is that arm pain that everyone complains about. Complain about it in tested and untested, but you'll see it a lot more in this particular population I'm talking about. So what's our expectation in terms of changing the shoulder range of motion to the point where they're actually supporting it with their back rather than jamming themselves onto a position? it's a game of years, and we're not looking necessarily always then for perfection, but improvement. And it might be the case in these particular examples, but absolutely it's going to be a case of where do you lift the most weight? Let's do that. So like you could make the same argument for sinking versus a soft touch on bench press. And my belief would be that the gold standard is going to be a softer touch, a lighter touch, I should say. But if we're 12 weeks, 16 weeks, whatever it is out of competition, and you can't maintain that and you press a lot more sinking, guess what we're doing for the competition? We're sinking that thing right in. Like there has to be a reasonable practical element to this idea of moving towards quote unquote gold standard technique.
Yeah.
It's quite hard to project that when, again, I'm so bullish about like, yeah, there's this gold standard. Everyone has to lift perfectly. It's like, yeah. Okay. In practice, it's not as simple.
It's like the journey to Everest. We're going to get there. And it sounds like you probably bounce between like development on getting towards the gold standard, and we're in peaking. We're taking you as an athlete now and getting you to have the most amount of weight on the bar when we have the competition lined up within a certain time threshold.
Yeah, I suppose that makes sense. That's a very reasonable position to take, which is what I think anyone should expect in a conversation like this. But I guess kind of where that leads me to think, and I haven't really gone down a lot of these rabbit holes, so I'm thinking out loud a little bit because that's just what we do here sometimes. But I suppose that would, like taking the sinking versus soft touch bench press, for example, when you're further out, that would lead you perhaps to start making some changes that you would hope kind of build up your adaptations in a way that softer touch would be the stronger position eventually, which is, I guess, what you would do for any sort of technical change. I guess the counter strategy to that would just be to lean into the thing that's already better.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So what I hear you saying is that you're going to focus on building up this ideal. That's the strategy that you're going to default to.
Yes. And so it's important because like if the sinking versus soft touch analogy is great, because if they always perform better with the sinking, why even bother moving towards the soft touch? Like, why would we even bother doing that in the first place? And there has to be a clear reason as to why that is part of, again, our idea of this gold standard for me to justify doing that. And so for me, if I'm using that particular example, it's like, well, where's the power coming from? Muscle of the pecs. They're going to be doing the big work. Relying on momentum is an effective strategy when you can't control that bottom position. Absolutely. But ultimately, if we're going to express the power in our pecs effectively, we don't want to be firing a cannon out of a canoe. We want to be pushing from a very stable base. And so there'll be a reasonable degree of improvement in creating that base, even with the sink over time as we work towards this particular gold standard. So if working towards the gold standard also helps the less than ideal technique along the way, then it's a reasonable strategy to work towards. And that's what I tend to find across the board. So like back to the rounded back example, if we're working towards the reasons why and effectively applying the cueing and strengthening of these particular things that are letting the back fold in the first place, even when the back starts to fold, we tend to be closer towards where that ideal is and able to express more strength. That's why it's not enough in any technical change. It's why it's not enough to just do it. Depth is the perfect example. We all know that if a lifter squats high in competition, you can't just say, okay, let's go lighter and squat deeper, because when they go heavier again, they still squat high. You always have to be like, why is that occurring? What are the strategies and steps that we need to take to ensure that this doesn't happen in the future, and build that in and work towards it?
That's I feel like I could continue to explore some of this territory, but I'm not sure how you are on time, Tom.
I'm happy to keep going as long as you want. I love this shit.
Sure.
It's fantastic.
It's how are you doing?
Oh, I'm good. Like I said, I took a 4-hour nap. But Thomas, kind of your expression reminded me, it's not just about immediately changing the strength, but it's the strength we gain along the way that just makes the lifts better. That doesn't mean to seem flippant, but I think your position, say, on the bench press makes sense. If you are able to get an athlete stronger in a light touch, it is likely going to come and make their sinking in competition stronger, because you've probably gotten pecs stronger. You probably improved their bracing and positioning, so that when they rely on their chosen technique that's further away from your goal, it still results in more weight on the bar.
Consistency, control, nailing the position from the top to the bottom, everything. Like, there has to be justification for everything. And trust me, I've thought about everything from every angle. So the more we can unpack, the better.
Bunch of nerds here who like unpacking things.
I'm more than happy. I am absolutely more than happy to be proven wrong on any of this stuff. And again, for myself, and I'm not saying you guys need to prove me wrong. I'm saying I'm going to continue to do this in my own coaching practice for me and look for ways to be proven wrong. And I've been proven wrong many a times over the years to improve things. Like, just a classic journey would be like bracing cueing. You know, we were all taught to brace like you're going to get punched in the stomach, and then brace like 360 bracing, and then ribs to hips, and then stacking. And like, the language and execution has changed. Spread the floor, push your knees out, do this with your toes, bar halfway over your foot. All these technical ideals have changed and evolved, and just, I'm not the kind of person that's just going to listen to someone speak something with justification without questioning why. How can we do this wrong? So my cueing strategy, right? When you hear a cue and you think, okay, this could be valuable, you don't want to try and get it right. You want to try all the ways you could potentially get it wrong. Yeah. It doesn't make sense to try and get it right, because we all know how to lift. Like, don't pull the bar apart to squeeze your upper back. All you're going to do is feel your upper back times 10, because you already know to do that. How can you do the action of pulling the bar apart without feeling your upper back? If the answer is yes, well, then let's speak closer to what we're trying to achieve, which means asking the question, what are we trying to achieve? And then simplifying things towards that. Because I maintain cueing a squat should be as easy as cueing someone to blink or to make a fist. Like, the actual cueing process shouldn't be like, oh, we've got a bag of cues that we have to throw at people and try throwing shit at a wall until something sticks. It's no, like, if we can understand exactly what we're trying to do with the body, we can simplify things right down to something that anybody can understand. And then all of a sudden, you can use the same tools to coach someone squatting 450 kilos to teach them how to squat in the first place.
I don't know. There's something here that is going to take me a little longer to think about what it is, and I'm sorry, that's a limitation that I've got, I think. But expect some DMs from me being like, "Well, what would you say to this example? And what would you say to that example?"
Yeah,
can't help it. That's just how it goes. But I really like I dig the approach of trying to solve the problem. And you can only solve the problem better if you can understand what's not working with the current approach. Trying to figure out a better way to get from A to B requires us to know what's not working. So having the perfect solution is not ideal in some different ways, for sure. But I suppose if I'm going to summarize the technique side of this, is that today I learned that we're probably closer on that than I initially thought. And I've got some thinking to do about, like, what does it mean to have kind of an ideal in mind? But also that I do think there's some differences from person to person, and I don't know, like the spinal flexion and the deadlift thing kind of is the example that keeps coming up in my head. Kind of coming back to, what you were talking about, like, leaning on your experience in your coaching practice. I think about those guys that I've coached and tried to help them flatten out their deadlift and ultimately not successful. So maybe that's a strategy problem, right? Like and I'm open to that. Like perhaps it was some sort of a strategy issue that we were unable to find the solution. But we did try the things and they were not successful.
Yeah. And I've been there a lot. I just try to look at everything as like, I've tried every diet. The client that comes to you and says, I've tried every diet. It's like, well, you've tried everything that you know how to try. Is there a solution that's out there that you don't know about? And I find this a lot with people problem solving for technical issues, or people that are like, oh, that's just the way that they lift, or that works best for them. It's like, yes, it does within the framework of what you currently believe and know and understand. And I apply the same thought of thinking to me. I'm absolutely certain that there's a lot about what I practice and preach, maybe not a lot, but there's stuff about what I practice and preach as a whole, coaching, programming, technique, everything that's wrong or that needs refinement. Like that's how we stay successful in the coaching world, is by consistently trying to get better.
Yeah. I want to talk with you a bit about some like more nuts and bolts training kind of things as well, if we've got the time for it.
Sure.
You mentioned conversation around frequency, and the post I made about frequency earlier this week, which is partly inspired by studying up on some of the conversations that you've had, and plenty of us have done similar things when we talk about high frequency or low frequency. Is like, what do we mean by that? And I don't know, rather than me give the summary this time, why don't I kick it to you to give your elevator pitch on training frequency and why it's not as important as a lot of people think that it is.
Your audience is going to hate me after this.
I actually think we tend to be a lot of training nerds that are trying to do the same thing that you're doing.
I think a lot of people just like hearing these different things and conflicting opinions. It's good.
Who wants to listen to a podcast where everybody agrees with each other to death?
Well, for the listener, I'm obviously being facetious. You might hate me. I don't know. But I'm not the biggest proponent of what might be considered high frequency SBD days, that kind of thing. I'm quite anti, if anything. Now, first and foremost, I'm in favor of a program that produces the best results, and there's certain aspects of this whole coaching thing that where a not perfect approach is actually the best approach. Like if I don't believe in SBD days personally, but if an athlete needed to create trust, rapport, buy-in to my system, and was adamant that the only thing that they need in their program is an SBD day, maybe I'll build that in such a way where I believe that it's not going to harm the overall program, and then focus on things that I believe are actually going to excel this person while I develop trust and rapport. Because ultimately, what's going to get you stronger is not the perfect scientific programming and technique, but consistency and intensity over time, right? So anyway, to answer the actual question, my elevator pitch on frequency is my programming approach is probably the most recent change that I've made. I've always been of the, I guess, lower end of the frequency table, but I've drawn a lot of inspiration from, I guess, what you'd consider modern hypertrophy training more recently. And it's very much built on the idea that we've kind of been sold a bit of a lie in terms of, I think most people who who coach powerlifting believe that there's strength training and hypertrophy training, and that they're separate rep ranges, intensities, all of that sort of thing. Where in reality, we've kind of got hypertrophy as the adaptation, And strength is really like the skill expression, right? It's the muscle grows and gets stronger as a response to training. If it was just strength, then why don't we just do sets of 1 to 5 on every single exercise all the time and just turn our bodies into little strong balls of muscle? It's just not quite how it works, right? And so when it comes to frequency, I guess I lean a little bit more or draw inspiration from hypertrophy in terms of the frequency that you'd use to maximize muscle growth, where then it wouldn't quite make sense to bench 5 days a week, especially seeing the pecs are going to be the muscle that takes the longest to recover. In order to be able to do that and maintain it at some sort of high quality, the question would be like, are you training to get this thing better, or are you training to make your body adapt to the training stimulus that you're putting it under, as in adapt to be able to comfortably bench 5 days a week rather than get stronger by doing that thing? And again, all I can do is lean on my practice and my experience, which is that I've seen enormous strength gains in all populations, little, big, steroids, no steroids, using a quote unquote lower frequency approach. I hate the term low frequency in that sense. I program most of the time 2 to 3 sets of squat, bench, deadlift per week, and that's it. And people will call that very low frequency. I see it as adequate frequency. I'd see like low frequency as once a fortnight. And I have to acknowledge my bias, which is my coaching experiences, particularly more in like the last 5 to 6 years, is skewed pretty heavily towards elite level powerlifters rather than the general average. And so like if I was talking to you about like how to improve or what kind of programming strategies to use the more beginner and intermediate, there probably would be more frequency.
So when you say, when I hear you talk about this and you talk about like lower frequency, 3 to 4 sets per week, I'm hearing that as being the training for the comp lift specifically. So then there would be additional work that is is there additional work that is still training, like let's take the squat, for example, that would still train the squat movement pattern, but just not as a competition exercise, whether it be like a tempo variation or a different bar or something like that?
So there would be, by your post with the definitions of frequencies, I can't remember what the 3 were. There was the comp variation,
the pattern, and the muscle.
The pattern and the muscle. So if the pattern involves in the context of squat, hack squat, pendulum squat, belt squat, squat machine, Rogers squat, whatever it is, twice a week, absolutely, without question. So the squat pattern would be trained twice per week. In terms of exposure to competition squat, including variations, up to twice per week. Normally, if I'm using a tempo variation, we call it like modulated intensity, would be the level that tempo falls under, making it heavier without making it harder, so making the relative difficulty higher so that you can have that technical element. Tempo would be my go-to. I'm very specific about what I believe tempo should be, which kind of bucks the trend. I'm not a believer in the tempo eccentric and then explode up. It doesn't make sense to me because people lose position and basically butcher their technique or rely on their strongest technique, which is the technique that we're trying to fix when they explode up. So we program tempo concentrics, so tempo eccentric and concentric essentially, where the focus is on the position. Anyway, different story. But yeah, two exposures to the pattern. So normally it's like a squat and a hack squat, and intensity on both of those things is high. And so on that competition squat day will be a hinge pattern, which is normally some sort of RDL, or stiff leg deadlift. And then on the deadlift day, the primary exercise is deadlift. The second day is that squatting pattern. And then on bench press is probably the lift that we have 2 of the competition pattern most. And when I say a lot of my staff work with lifters that prefer a higher frequency, and I have no issue with people programming a higher frequency if there's justification for it, whether it's a mental payoff or developing that trust and rapport, or they genuinely believe it's going to help in some way, shape, or form. So when I talk about programming, I guess I'm talking again through the lens of my bias. But with bench press, there tends to be 2 bench exposures, and normally the second one's a variation, like a close grip bench press or an incline bench press. For most of my bigger lifters, though, it's normally a main bench press, and then on that second day is going to be an overhead and then a chest press machine of some sort.
Interesting. Overhead. Yeah. I mean, I think this is another area where we end up landing closer together than we are apart. But my tendency has been to program the comp lift itself probably once a week as a default. Like I tell people a lot of times that like all coaches have tendencies, and the tendency is just where I tend to go in the absence of something pulling me in a different direction. I don't necessarily believe that you have to do that, or that's the quote unquote best way or anything like that. That's just my tendency. And, if something nudges me in a different direction, or, other coaches have other tendencies, I think that's fine. My early coaching education and stuff like that is part of what informs that tendency. You can see the through line. But for me, one of my tendencies is to kind of probably default to programming comp lift once a week in most cases. It's just that from a pattern standpoint, I would say that that's where I probably have the most flexibility, that I'll train that movement pattern more often. I don't have a problem pulling in high frequency training for the bench, meaning like training the pattern, up to 5 times a week or something like that. I do that often enough. And we can talk about that a bit more in a sec, but lower body tends to be a bit less, tends to be, 2 to 3 times a week for the pattern, more 2 than 3. And then sometimes there's an additional training session in there that's just accessory work, muscle stimulus, that's not like any kind of, there's no skill adaptation to any of that, so that can kind of fill in some gaps. But part of the reason that I will lean on higher frequencies, it's hard to talk about without being super mathy about it, but you have a certain amount of training that needs to be done in a week. Somebody's, the level of volume that they're accustomed to, and then you have this range of volume that can be done in any given training session. Can you do more than, however much it is, 10 sets in a given session? Yeah, you probably could, but you've really lost effectiveness. You're not really providing any additional stimulus at that point. So if you need more work beyond what you can tolerate in however many sessions, at that like once a week range, then you've got to break it into more training sessions. And so that's kind of how I end up programming with higher frequencies, and just kind of to cherry pick a study that I don't intend to provide as like support for the idea, but it's more like what am I thinking when I'm like rationalizing some of this stuff. Like I do think about like muscle protein synthesis rates getting shorter and shorter as an athlete gets more and more experienced. Like earlier in your career, you do a training session and will have elevated protein synthesis for 72 hours or whatever the actual number is. But then as you get more experience, that window gets shorter and shorter. So can you provide a stimulus and then recover from it in that shorter window so that you could then provide the stimulus again? So this is a bit of some of the thinking that's going on. Again, like to my ear, that sounds more similar than different, although I'm sure there are some differences.
No. I completely agree. Yeah, just think in practice we're applying it slightly different for sure. As in my view would be on the same thing is like, how much do we have to dumb down the intensity in order to be able to maintain the ability to do that across the week? And of course you're going to run into individual differences and all the rest of it. It's like the programming thing is so interesting as well, because we talk about this programming thing, or people talk about programming thing like it's so static. It's so dynamic, like how your session look impacts how your week looks, impacts how your block looks, and there's so many dials and levers to play with that are going to impact the success of the program across the thing. It's like, so our programming that we use, or my programming that I use is very, very, very accessory dominant. It looks a lot like a bodybuilding program, and if I trimmed a whole bunch of that accessory work, it kind of buys back a whole bunch of energy that we can direct towards other things. Sure. Right? And so if I wanted to justify doing that, I could. And it's just like, we justify different things based on our viewpoints, what we're trying to achieve, and that's going to inform then what the programming looks like. Because at the end of the day, it comes down to, are you able to train with the adequate intensity to drive the adaptations that we're looking for and get stronger over time? And there's many roads that arrive at the same destination, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If I were to summarize my programming as a whole, it looks a lot more like a bodybuilding program than I guess a modern powerlifting program. And I mean, you're very well aware of the ebbs and flows of programming change over the years. It was kind of like my induction into powerlifting programming was like Mad Cows 5x5, and then 531, and then West Side, and then Shaker for a long time, and then the Cohen Philippi deadlift program, which Cohen had nothing to do with, but use that as inspiration for the other lifts, and then just start making shit up, and then Juggernaut stuff, and then your stuff, and so many influences from all different directions, and a lot of us have just ended up with a mishmash of different things. And then a few of us have really leaned into one particular thing and developed a suite of justifications and anecdotal experience and data that kind of informs what we do now. And it just so happens that mine has landed in this particular spot.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's reasonable. And I mean, you maybe already know this, but I tend to think that there's a lot of different possible solutions out there, and you see lots of people that develop a lot of strength with, a variety of different program solutions. And I like to have different options available, like I get the idea of, and not saying you're necessarily this way. I'm thinking about another conversation I've had, honestly, where a coach was kind of advocating to be a specialist in like this very narrow training style. Like, I'm going to be really good at applying this particular training strategy. And I think, like, I mean, that's great, but like, I've got athletes who like that absolutely would not work for. So what do I do about that situation? And I mean, training careers are long, and not saying that you have to be, coach somebody for their entire career, but you'll coach people at different stages of their career, and they just need different solutions. So being able to competently program, program in a different style, competently program in a way that includes a lot of accessory work, that it doesn't include a lot of accessory work, but to do it well enough to get good results in a variety of different ways, I think is important. And I mean, I'm biased because I'm a training nerd about a lot of this, so I enjoy the process of learning about it anyway. So how convenient.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting reflecting in the position I am now, having started as a solo gym owner and solo coach and solo online coach, to now having staff and a course where I educate. And when I educate, I can't come, this is what I do, and this is what, it's like, no, here's the principles, and here's how the principles could be applied. So when we talk about programming, I'm a fixed number guy. So a percentage guy. I hate the word percentage, because percentage of what? I'm a fixed number guy. I provide numbers for my lifters to hit. I don't program using RPE. But I would say probably 40% of my staff prefer programming with RPE. And so I need to have the skills and the tools to understand not only how to coach using that as a strategy, but also how to teach people how to coach using that as a strategy, which means I need to be open-minded to the fact that other strategies exist that I don't necessarily lean into myself personally, and see an enormous amount of value in them, because if I didn't, why would I bother teaching? So like recognizing that there are so many ways to achieve this, and as long as we come back to what are the key defining principles, which is why, although I'm known as like some frequency hater or SBD day hater, I'm definitely not a hater of these things. Like I think there are so many pros that you can draw from so many of these things. It's just more like when you're applying these things as a coach, your question is, I want the best outcome for my lifter in my suite of information, knowledge, experience. Can I do this in what I believe to be a better way with what I know and what I've experienced? If the answer is yes, do that thing.
Yeah.
It's the same when it comes to accessory selection. It's like, why would you do this accessory when you can do that accessory? Or you could justify this accessory as being good, but if every time you prescribe it, everyone butchers it, like a good morning. Like, good mornings are a great exercise, but everyone stuffs them up. So like sometimes you might lean on a accessory that you might not deem as good for the task, or a programming strategy that you might not deem as good for the task, that you know will be executed better, right?
Yeah, no, the actual barbell gets lifted. Yeah. Well, let's sidebar on the RPE fixed percentage thing a little bit, because I think that's another area where there's not as much difference as people think.
No, they're the same thing.
Yeah, it's put the right weight on the bar, right?
Yeah.
And even for myself, I think it's a mistake to use RPE training in the absence of target weights, which are percentage derived, And I mean, I personally prescribe them in a very flexible way, in a frequently updated kind of way, that, I know that I want you to do a triple at 8. So I know what that percentage is, and I'm going to base it off of how you performed in training this week. We're going to come up with a target, and of course I'm going to want you to deviate from that target as needed, but it is a target for a reason, and we're going to hopefully land close to that. Plus a little bit would be ideal, minus a little bit if necessary, but that's where we need to be. And I think it's a mistake to program just open-ended RPEs. Just go in the gym, have no idea what you're going to lift, and feel it out. I think that's I don't know how people do that.
This is just a completely unrelated question, but obviously, like, you've been so pivotal in propagating the RPE method. You ever watch things online and be like, turn into the Godfather? Look how they massacred my boy. Like, you ever watch the application, or you ever click onto videos of people talking about the best way to use RPE, and you're like, that ain't it?
Sometimes. So I had an interesting experience at Worlds going back a few years. There was a coach who, like a national team coach, referee type, and he came up to me and just kind of out of nowhere says, "How do you feel about all these people butchering your program?" And I was like, "I don't know what you mean." And he's like, "RPE, like people, they screw it up all the time. They mess it up." And I mean, my honest thought was like, well, it's not my program. Like I popularized the term and put a chart to it, but like as a concept, it predates me. And I think lifters have been training with an RPE forever, even if they didn't call it as such, right? That it's a thing. It's like, how do you, like, all these people are doing repetitions wrong. Like, what does that even mean? You know?
Yeah.
So sometimes I can be a little territorial around the concept of it, but most of the time not. Most of the time it's a thing, and you know, you can misuse hammers or you can use them properly. It's up to you.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I love it. I think it has been the most sophisticated language that we can use between coach and lifter to define the lifter's experience of what they're lifting. Like, it really puts a language that we can use via this thing if both the coach and lifter understands it on an intimate level. Yeah. It's like you can communicate. And so although I just said I don't really use RPE that much, I almost always, in fact, I'd say I can't remember the last time that I didn't use it for peaking. So I'll program a range for numbers for peaking, which is like, you should be lifting about this much. And then I'll program an RPE to it, which is to say, and it should feel like this. So here's the feeling that I expect it. You want to, you know, here's the feeling I expect it. Here's the feeling I expect you to experience. And here's the number of range that I expect it to fall in. Do that.
Do you use, like, what's the communication like post-training feedback? You know, hey coach, I hit my top single today and it felt hard. Well, how hard did it feel? Like, what's that communication process like? Or, I mean, I guess there's video, so there's that assessment as well.
Yeah, I mean, like, the only time that really applies to my programming style is during a peak anyway.
Okay.
Because so like I program prospectively, so I send out a 4-week block in advance, typically like 4 weeks in a deload. So I use fixed block length, and I'm not making weekly adjustments. I'm confident enough in my system where if once I have the information that I need, I can program in a sense that is going to land where they need to be week to week. And again, that's just by virtue of experience doing. No, don't get me wrong. This isn't lifted. Like, I believe most people, or pretty much everyone, falls into an archetype, and the more experience you have, the better you are at taking that person and being like, oh, you're this archetype, you're that archetype. You know? You're the big, juicy 35-year-old on a heap of gear that has terrible mobility and trains like this. You fall into that box, and the more experience you have, the more boxes become clear to you. And I mean, again, at risk of sounding too bullish, we have systems built in for teaching auto regulation. We build in ranges. We use RIRs. We use all that. So again, same thing. Like, we're communicating the same thing. And in terms of the feedback, it's like most of the time for me, I'm doing weekly check-ins and I'm listening to what they're saying and making changes if we have to. It's just very rare that we have to make drastic changes.
Yeah. Have you messed around with velocity very much?
I have extremely limited experience with it. Yeah. First to admit that, absolutely.
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's been an interesting thing to play with, you know, from a lifter standpoint and a coaching standpoint. I think it's kind of a natural evolution. It gets around most of the drawbacks of RPE. I mean, it introduces other drawbacks, in particular around like data management and everything, but it's a different set of problems. But
yeah,
it is more objective and more nuanced, which is pretty nice to have.
Yeah, I guess the hardest thing, and again, I have no experience, so I'm coming from a completely green perspective when it comes to velocity stuff. Like, if I reflect on my own experience as a lifter and watching people as a coach, there are days where things just seem to move slower for no real good. Like, you have a session where everything just moves slower on that day. There's no good explanation fatigue wise. You don't necessarily feel any more fatigued. There's no technical discrepancy. You're just not firing that day for whatever reason. I mean, how do you account for skews in the data caused by random things like that? How much stock do you put into that stuff? And I mean, that's obviously opening Pandora's box. I'm sure you could go very deep on all of that.
Well, I mean, from my perspective, and I won't monologue about it too long, I hope, but is similar thinking to your thinking around technique. Like I see similar like argument structure here, because my thinking is, the bar speed is slower on a certain day. What's the reason for that? And I agree with you. It's not always fatigue. People make this huge assumption, I think, of any bad day because fatigue. And, I think that's just not the way that it works. What else is going on there? I don't know. And I'm okay not having all the answers right this minute. But one of the things I'm thinking about is like, if I prescribe a single, we can, if I want you to do a single at 90% or 92%, what am I trying to accomplish? It's technical practice. It's kind of exposure to that loading. It's an opportunity to to kind of feel what your opener-ish is going to feel like, right? So if we happen to be having a bad day on that day, is that still the weight that gives me those effects? I mean, maybe not. Maybe that's to put a different example on it, like we were talking about hypertrophy, and a lot of the benefits of hypertrophy tend to be like a proximity to failure sort of thing, provided that you've got enough reps at that point. Like leaning a little bit on the effective reps hypothesis, but people can quibble over whether that's valid or not. I mean, from a coach's standpoint, it's like, yeah, we're pretty close here. Maybe there's some edge cases that aren't quite it, and that's fine. I'm fine nerding out about that stuff too. But from a pragmatic standpoint, it gets you pretty close. It's an easy way to think about it. So how can I make sure that we're in the range that we want to be in? Velocity is one way to do it. RPE is another way to do it. But kind of the other side of that is the fatigue management side, and kind of a lot of where the origin of RPE was is you had people, especially on accessories, would take them to failure, or as close to failure as they could force themselves to go. And a lot of people, particularly like the big juicy dudes example that you were using, found that was super fatiguing. And, I've told this story before where I was at the time spending a lot of time on the Elite FTS Q&A, where they were getting a lot of questions about stuff like this. And it kind of became common answers like, well, look, you don't have to go all the way to failure. You could leave a rep in the tank, and this was a landmark concept at the time, right? Which seems silly now, because now, like, leave a rep in the tank was, perceived as sandbagging at the time, but now going to a 9 RPE blows people's minds. But yeah, I mean, that it's an objective way. Velocity becomes an objective way to kind of measure that. Like, are we getting the effect that we're trying to get from the work that we're doing? I mean, it's the same thing though. You put the right weight on the bar, you lift it the right number of times, and I don't care how you arrive at that conclusion, whether it's percentage or you've got a magic 8-ball or whatever, as long as it ends up being the correct weight, however we get there is irrelevant. It's just that I tend to think that RPE, velocity, something like that puts us there pretty often. Caveat from before, as long as it's accompanied by having a decent target weight.
Yeah.
We can't just miracle this stuff out of thin air.
Is the general expectation, I feel like the answer to this question is obvious, but also it's not so obvious in my head, which is the general expectation that as a person, like, we can use velocity to measure a person getting stronger, even if we're not testing their strength, as in the way that they move a submaximal weight should increase over time. And the reason I ask it being such a pedestrian question is because I think of one particular guy that comes to mind that started training with me. I think he squatted like 190 kilos. And by the end of the time that he left, he was squatting like 370. So like significant improvement over the years. And the way he squatted 170 when it was his max was not very different to the way that he squatted it when he was squatting 370. And this guy just crawled his weights up no matter what weight it was. Like there seemed to be no change in velocity as he got stronger, but also across the spectrum of his warm-ups.
Yeah.
Like he would do a weight and I'd be like, bro, you're messing up your top sets today, guarantee it. And then lo and behold, he just busted them out. Have you seen many cases where the rate of velocity that you'd expect to improve relative to their strength gain hasn't actually matched up? Like they're just a slow person?
They do exist. They definitely do exist. I don't see it often.
And vice versa? Like are they just like really fast people?
Yeah. So and this is kind of where the data management side of it becomes a little burdensome, is because each person and each lift is a little bit different. And, you know, I've got some easy calculators that I've built over time that, you know, help streamline that process, but still the same type of thing. Like your bench press probably almost certainly moves slower than your squat at 1 rep max, and by extension, all the other RPEs as well. And I have seen it where, you know, a good example is, I don't know if you know Susie Hart-McGarry. She, you know, many time U.S. national champion. You know, she coaches me at competitions and stuff. We talk about this stuff sometimes. Same sort of thing. She's used a Tendo in her training, but notices there's just not much difference. There's not much velocity loss between reps. So like as the set goes on, they're all about the same until all of a sudden the bottom falls out. And then each weight is more or less the same. But in practice, I haven't run into that very often. Most people do seem to have like this sort of velocity response, like where the lighter weights move a bit faster, heavier weights move a bit slower, and that we can use that to give us some actionable information. So maybe it's that, hey, your last warm-up today was slow, was like slower than it normally is for you. And maybe that's an indication that you should lower the weight on your top set, or maybe it's an indication you need to pull your head out of your ass and actually try, you know. And I mean, I'll use it in both directions, you know.
Sorry, now I get super curious. One quick question on what you just said, which is with someone like Susie, where there's like a stable velocity and then a quick drop off. For us mere mortals, it's pretty obvious. Like you get to a point, things start to slow down, and for me, then it's like I feel I'm slowing down, and I can gauge the proximity to failure that I'm at. With someone who has a pretty stable velocity and then rapid drop off, do they feel the same, or is that drop off unpredictable for them?
Feels pretty the same. Like Susie's not a big RPE gal either, if memory serves correctly. She can probably perceive some differences, like you would feel like on a tempo lift, you know, like on a tempo, obviously the velocity's controlled externally, but there is still like fatigue that's happening internally. So I would assume that you could perceive some level of difference, but not enough to be like a reliable control. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Definitely one of those where like it's a neat tool, but it's not always the right tool. Yeah. All right. Well, I will have to get to a training session, but like you said, I could kind of keep going around on this all day, all night for Mel, but all day for.
Oh, I've gotten quiet.
Understandably.
Yeah, man. I really appreciate all your time. Thanks for sharing your thoughts with us.
No. Thank you so much for having me on. If I'm truthful, my little boy dream has always been to be on podcasts like this, and I've listened to you ramble on for years, and it's been great, man.
Shh. There is a secret to great training programs, but it's not a magic set and rep scheme or this one weird exercise that powerlifting pros don't want you to know about. The secret is in your training log. You see, years ago, we began developing tools to help you unlock these secrets and we've been putting them online for free ever since. That's right, it's free for everybody. Now you may be thinking, what's the big deal? People have been logging training forever. And you're right, but the secret isn't just in keeping a logbook. It's using that log to make better training decisions. That's the real secret. This is where the RTS training log excels. You haven't done SSB squats in 3 months and you're wondering what your target weight should be? We can help you with that. Did you overshoot on your top set and you're wondering if you should adjust your back off sets? We can help you with that too. Are you building the most important training block of this year and you're wondering what your most highly effective blocks have in common? Yep, we got you covered there too. There's more. There's a lot more. And yes, it is all free. Not just a free trial, not free with ads, just regular free. You go to reactivetrainingsystems.com, then you click on apps, sign up for a login, and you're in.